cloud. Great. Okay. So like I said, today is our final webinar for the season, Winterizing the Garden and Fall Garden Activities. So I wanted to start off by acknowledging that I am joining you here today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'm grateful to be here today with all of you for this webinar. And I'll pass it over to Tessa to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kaylin. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Tessa, and I'm the Central Island Community Animator with Farm to School BC. And I am calling in today from the traditional unceded territory of the Cowichan Nation here in Cowichan Valley. I'll pass it back to you, Kaylin.
Thanks, Tessa. So before we start, I know lots of you have joined us before and are familiar with the organization, but Farm to School BC is a program that brings healthy, local, and sustainable food into schools across British Columbia. We provide hands-on learning opportunities that develop food literacy, and we strengthen the local food system and enhance school and community connectedness. We are supported by we're a program of the Public Health Association of BC and supported by the province of British Columbia. Our provincial team includes myself, who's a food literacy coordinator advisor, our provincial manager, Marcus Lobb, and our communications coordinator, Madison Pinder, who's here with us today. And these are the folks that are our wonderful community animators for our hubs around the province. So if you're lucky enough to be in one of those hubs, these are folks that you can reach out to for support. They're working in your community all the time, doing really great, exciting things. So I encourage you to reach out to those folks if that feels right to you. And I'll get you to go. Oh yeah, these are just a list of the school districts that are covered by those hubs in case you're new to that. Great, thanks, Tessa. So today on our agenda, we are going to be starting with some knowledge about winterizing the garden. We'll go into season extension after that, and then talking about fall planting. We have lots of resources to share with you today about fall and winter garden activities. And then we're going to wrap it up with thinking about projects for building climate resilience in the garden. So I think that's like a really great direction to go into thinking about the fall and winter and what you might be able to do in the community and the school that you're working with. Great. Thanks, Tessa. I think I'll pass it over to you now.
Thanks, Kaylin. This picture makes me excited for the first frost of the year. There's nothing more beautiful than frost on kale plants. And kale is often one of those hardy school garden plants that survives the drought of the summer and the cool of the winter. So perhaps you'll be lucky to have some frosty kale in your school garden this coming month. So we want to chat today about winterizing the school garden. It can feel this time of year like you're winding down on your garden tasks, but the school year is winding up, and so it's wonderful to include students in the outdoor classroom of the garden this time of year. And there's a lot of purposeful work for students to do in the fall with garden cleanup and winterizing the garden, mulching the garden beds. So it's a wonderful time to bring students out into the garden, encourage their connection to the garden outside of just the main growing season, and encourage that kind of curiosity that comes from watching the garden decompose over the winter. So the first stage of getting out in the garden that we'll talk about today is garden cleanup. And I take a less is more approach with this. It can be tempting to kind of like that tidy aesthetic of those bare garden beds with everything removed, and you feel really productive. But in doing so, you're also removing a lot of nutrients from the soil. You're removing habitat for insects and birds. You're also exposing that soil, that bare soil, to erosion and the rain leaching out the nutrients. So we really encourage you to, although you want to clean up the garden, still leave a lot of that debris in the garden. For example, when you're say your garden has raspberry canes, if you're chopping them, instead of chopping them down to the ground, leave a couple feet, because those perfect tubes are actually homes for native bees. So native bees burrow in there and nest in those raspberry canes. And that's just one example of how if you leave a bit of that material behind, you're inviting insects into the garden that are beneficial to the area. For those things that you are removing from your garden, you have a couple options. One way is you can actually just speed up decomposition with chopping them up into smaller pieces and letting them drop on the garden bed. So if you have some lettuce plants in your garden, give kids some scissors. It could be really fun to chop up those plants, break them into small pieces. That falls into the garden bed and provides a mulch for the garden bed. There are some things that you want to remove the whole plant from. If you're dealing with something like a tomato plant that might have a blight on it, you want to actually take that out of the garden so you stop the spread of the blights and the funguses and the disease in your gardens from year to year. So do take a look at the garden if you have things you're noticing like black kind of moldy spots on your vegetations like tomato plants, then do take those out of the garden. Some of the things you take out, you might want to save for next year. Sunflower stalks are actually incredibly sturdy and make really good trellises. So get creative as you're cleaning up the garden and think, how could I use this next year? Or is this a home for an insect? Or is there a lesson in this? We want to watch how the birds will eat the seeds from the sunflowers and watch how the decomposition happens over time. So be curious in that process. I think decomposition is just a natural fascination for students. So really involving them in that process can be a great way to connect them to the garden. Once you're feeling satisfied with kind of cleaning up the surface of the garden, the next thing to think about is now adding back to that surface. Mulching is a wonderful way to add nutrients to the soil. It also protects the soil, both from the cold, but also from the rains that will leach out the nutrients. And then it provides a habitat for insects in the soil, in that surface layer of the soil. I am a really big believer in mulching with leaves. It's a material that you often have handy in your schoolyard area. And many leaves are just a perfect carbon nitrogen ratio that they break down into this ideal compost material. Your spring self will thank you so much if you take the time in the fall to have a good leaf mulch on your garden beds. It's something I do at home as well. And then in the spring, you just pull back those leaves and you have this like fluffy, light, insect-rich, dark soil underneath the leaves. And it's wonderful for planting into in the spring. So take the time this time of year to build up that mulch. Not only are you building soil, you're also suppressing the weeds that will take advantage of any bare soil to propagate. So you save time, not just in the soil building aspect, but also in the weeding aspect come spring. If you have a schoolyard full of leaves and you have an amazing class that loves to rake leaves all day long and you have too many leaves to deal with and your garden beds have this like luscious mulch already on them, save more of those leaves and make a compost. You can have just a simple kind of wire cage in your garden. Oh, sorry, the slideshow's jumping around. I'm not sure if it is on your end too. And that can be a great way to collect all those leaves and let them decompose in that container. They'll heat up, they'll steam, and they'll break down into a beautiful compost. Often schools can't have compost because of food scraps attract rodents and other animals to the school gardens, but a leaf compost is one that may be permitted by your district. And so a great way to help building soil nutrients back into your garden system. Many schoolyards do have deciduous trees with great leaves. However, perhaps you aren't fortunate. There are other ways of getting leaves to your school garden. I work with one school in the Nanaimo area that does an annual fundraiser in which students go out and they rake the leaves in the adjacent yards, the neighbors that are around the school. They rake those leaves, bring those leaves back to the schoolyard, and the neighbors appreciate their leaves being raked and offer donations to the school garden. So it's a great fundraiser as well as just building that connection between neighbors and the school. And the end result is also a wonderful mulched school garden. Another option is parents can bring leaves to the school. Instead of a bottle drive, you can do a leaf drive, and parents can drop off bags of leaves for the school gardens. Another option is you can connect to a local municipality. Many municipalities do leaf collection, and some of those municipalities then donate composted leaves back to community projects. So reach out to your local municipality too. Kaylin in a minute is going to talk a little bit more about communication with connecting leaves to schools, but I do just want to mention also some safety concerns. If you are raking leaves on school properties or otherwise, just be aware of any sort of contaminants or sharps that may be in those leaves. So whether it be providing kids with gloves or making sure you're assessing where you're raking the leaves from to make sure the students are safe. And Kaylin, I'll pass it back to you to share a little bit more about communicating around leaves.
Yeah, I think I just received a call out from a community garden that I'm connected to through our school. And this was sort of one of the infographics that they kind of like put out through their newsletter. I found it really helpful just as an example of school like something that could be included in school communications through a pack, through your school newsletter, just being able to share different types of leaves that you might want to include in that mulch. And part of it is like educating the school community or sharing those ideas with the school community as well. It's kind of inviting them and bringing them into that work. So, and I know last year when we did a call out for leaves with my class, it was like there were so many that we had to so there was not a shortage of them, and they were very excited. Parents were very happy to have kids active outside after school, clearing out the leaves in their yards and having somewhere to bring them. So it's great. Leaves are also just like a really great, this is another resource actually, sorry, that is through the Compost Education Center, who they have wonderful, we've already posted a mulching fact sheet in the chat. This is another example of one of the info sheets or fact sheets that they've posted. They have so many great pieces of information. Again, something that you could share with the school community or work with as a teacher in the classroom. One of the things like that I learned when I was reading the Urban Leaves sheet was thinking about leaf mold and how like, so what they shared was that leaf mold will actually hold significantly more moisture than topsoil, which I think is something that like, in some ways, like our education sometimes makes us like want to push away things like mold or bacteria or like those kinds of things. So I think getting that information coming in a different kind of way is really exciting. I learned something new when I was reading through it today too. So yeah. And leaves can also be another great thing to work with classes. Just thinking, this is another lesson plan and it's through SPEC. And they have a really great nature school program that we'll talk more about later in the presentation. This is an example of one of the resources they share to do with leaves. They have lots of great printouts that come along with them. And just thinking about ways of engaging with students once that growing season starts to wind down, thinking about maintaining that kind of like skill or that observation skill, those curiosities out in the garden. Great. Thanks, Tessa.
Thanks, Kaylin. A lot of the conversation around garden cleanup is kind of assuming you're putting your garden to bed for the winter, that you're getting rid of all the summer growth and tucking it in. But maybe you're fortunate to have plants that you're hoping to winter through the garden, or at least get a few more weeks out of them as the frosts are arriving. So we wanted to spend some time just talking about season extension. And a lot of what we talk about season extension can be applicable to this time of year when you're trying to protect things from the first frost, but also in the spring when you're wanting to get a head start on gardening or grow some things in those cold spring days. So I think we talked about spring season extension back in the spring in School Garden Mentorship, and we're going to revisit again here. It's nice that it can apply in the fall and spring so that any materials that you're investing in can have purpose for a long time in your school garden. So the first thing I want to talk about is remay. I love leaf mulch and I also love remay. It's so fun to talk about two of my favorite things in this workshop today. Remay is used a ton by farmers and I'm surprised it's not used by most gardeners and especially not at schools. It can make a huge difference in the garden. For many different reasons, not just season extension. It also keeps out insects and it keeps little kids' feet off of tender carrot seedlings. So there's a lot of benefits to investing in some remay for your school garden. What remay is this kind of like fabric-like material that you can put over a crop and it allows light to come in, but it keeps heat in the kind of tunnel that you create with the remay. You can either make a tunnel for remay as is pictured on the slide here, or you can also just simply lay it over your plants. Not only does it keep the soil a couple degrees warmer, it also is a physical barrier between the frost and the plant. So when the frost comes down from the sky, I don't know the science behind it, but it lands on the remay and it freezes on the remay instead of on the plants. And that difference can really protect the plants in those colder days. It's also such a delight in the winter. You look out in your garden and you don't see anything there, and then you pull back this like frosty, snowy reamy, and underneath is these like thriving kale plants, cabbage plants, cilantro survived for me over the winter here, kind of depending on where you're growing, but it's this wonderful little microclimate that you can create in the winter under the reamy. I just wanted to share a couple pictures of what this looks like in a schoolyard. On the left is students putting out reamy over those simple wire hoops, like in the previous picture. And then on the right is reamy in a school where they've used hula hoops just stretched over their garden beds. I've actually seen hula hoops in quite a few school gardens, and it's a great way to create those hoop structures and repurpose some old material you might have in your school. If you're curious to take season extension to the next level and want to engage in a really fun ADST project, you can think about building a cold frame. And there's so many great examples online of simple wood frames with plastic with poly stretched over them. The picture on the right there is a cold frame that I made with a group of students who were really keen to grow peppers. So we're actually looking for something to create more heat for plants in the summer. But this cold frame was then repurposed in the fall to protect kale plants. It was used again in the spring for seedlings and protecting transplants as we transplant them out. And it became a really useful tool in the garden. It's super lightweight, kids could carry it around. And it was a really fun project to build as a group too. So if you're keen to connect ADST into the garden, cold frames can be a really nice direction to go with that. So that's a little bit about season extension. We're kind of working backwards here. We talked about cleaning out your gardens and plants that are in the garden. Now we're talking about let's go back and put some more plants in the garden. So it's not too late to plant. So if you are keen to get out in the garden and keep planting, I want to suggest a couple crops that you could focus on this time of year. So first of all is garlic. And garlic's a wonderful plant to plant in school gardens. The bulbs are so big that it's really easy for students to make holes and put those cloves into the holes. It's also a really forgiving plant that you have a big window of when you can plant it. You could start now all the way through to the winter time to plant your garlic. Another nice thing about planting garlic is that once you plant your garlic, it likes to have a heavy mulch on top of it, whether that be leaves or straw or other materials. But it means that while you're growing garlic in the soil, you're also soil building at the same time. So if you're working with a school garden that really needs a nutrient boost, it's nice to plant garlic because you can be building the soil, but also making that garden bed purposeful for food production at the same time. If you want the details on how to plant garlic in your school garden, we'll put a link to this in the chat bar, but we have our fall harvest crop cards. And that is kind of student accessible knowledge for planting, all the information you need around planting garlic as well as harvesting it. Garlic's a bit of a tricky one because the main harvesting season for garlic falls in the summer when students aren't in school. So you do want kind of a vision of how you're going to use that garlic in the summer. And if you're a school garden that doesn't have any summer maintenance, then that would be something you'd want to be aware of. That said, you can harvest the scapes in June before the students leave, and the scapes are a wonderful food product as well to either turn into pesto. I love just barbecuing them or even just snacking on them. So do just think about that whole season of garlic as you're deciding to plant it for the fall. Another fall crop that I love is fava beans. My partner was just complaining that I picked up another package of fava bean seeds, but there's so many different varieties of fava beans. And they can offer a lot of benefits to the garden, not to mention I just think they're delicious. So the neat thing about fava beans is you can grow them either as a food crop and harvest the beans in the spring to eat, or you can grow them as a green manure. And we'll get more into green manures in a minute, but fava beans are a legume. So they have nodes on their roots that are actually using a symbiotic relationship to fix nitrogen into the soil. So it's bringing more nitrogen into your soil while also growing food. So you can choose to grow it as a food crop, or you can choose to grow it as a green manure, which means you'd let it grow for a little while and then incorporate it back into the soil. And we'll get more into that in a minute. Fava beans are also a great crop if you want to start seed saving with your class because it's a really easy plant to save those seeds and plant them year after year in your garden. I do just want to say one warning with fava beans. My experience is that aphids love fava beans. And so if you are leaving your fava beans in the school garden all through the spring, they will attract aphids. And so just be aware of what you may be bringing into the garden. I don't want anyone to say, Farm to School told us to plant fava beans and now we have a huge aphid infestation. So just be mindful. Perhaps it's a great learning lesson for kids to keep their eye on the fava beans and see when the aphids come in, but keep an eye out for that. Another thing for fall planting, I just touched on this with fava beans, is the idea of planting a cover crop or green manure. So what a cover crop or green manure is basically the idea that when you have a garden bed that's not actively producing food, you plant a crop in that garden bed that will use the nutrients in the soil, hold those nutrients in the plant itself, and then release those nutrients when you're ready to use that garden, you reincorporate those plants into the soil. So there's some plants that are particularly ideal for either holding nutrients or their legumes that are also fixing nutrients. And then when they're reincorporated into the soil, they add a lot of organic matter nutrients back into that soil. This time of year, there's some really hardy cover crops. You can plant something like fall or winter rye, and you can seed it now and it'll grow slowly through the winter, and then you can incorporate it back into your soil in the spring. Cover crops, I feel like, are a great solution, not to just this winter season, but to this year-round idea of a school garden. Often when I see school gardens, I see garden beds that aren't in production. And I think it can be really challenging for folks that are associated with school gardens to see that neglect, and they're concerned, oh no, we're not utilizing the school garden to its full potential. And I also see a challenge of the lack of nutrients in school gardens. And so cover crops are a great way of bringing together those two challenges, that whenever you don't have capacity to use all the bed space in your school gardens, plant a cover crop. It gives purpose to that fallow bed, that it's building nutrients. It's also often the summer cover crops are great for pollinators. I have a picture here of crimson clover, which is a gorgeous cover crop that fixes nitrogen, builds the soil while providing these beautiful red flowers for bees. And so the idea of cover cropping can help build your soil and just make that garden bed feel like a lush, productive place for learning and for soil building and for insects, while you're not necessarily using all the garden space for direct food production. If I've intrigued you on cover crops, the best place to start for learning a bit more is to head on over to the West Coast Seeds website, and we've offered a link here. They have a great variety of cover crops that are applicable for planting in BC at the kind of gardener level. And you can read more about each of those crops, what time of year you plant them, and how you'd incorporate that back into your soil. When Kaylin and I were putting this slideshow together, we realized we're thinking more and more about what's happening underground this time of year. And so I wanted to pass it over to Kaylin to explore that thought pattern.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation, Tessa. And I think one thing I was sharing with Tessa was that with my class this fall, we have been kind of in that practice of going outside and going out into the garden every day. And it's like reminding me that about that sort of importance of being engaged, not just in like productive months, but kind of connecting through that seasonality and through that rhythm, and how quickly the students and the kids pick up on that when they're in that practice, when they're in that kind of noticing just what's happening on the school ground. So one of the reasons these books came up was just thinking about almost thinking about fall and winter as those subterranean kind of thinking months where you really could get into an inquiry or an exploration around things like soils and bacteria, things that are living underground or things that are in different states or stages. And those are really, I think, an important part of thinking about that other part of the season when things are visible and when there is productivity. So I think, yeah, if you don't know these books, I highly recommend them for both adults and children, because they have these wonderful pictures that sort of just show the above and below, and in a cross section. I really love them a lot. And we wanted to open the chat up today for you folks out there, thinking about what is one activity that would bring your students or whoever you're working with out into the garden during the winter. So maybe things that you have done or things you're hoping to do this year. Yeah. We also have a kind of a small group today, so if anyone wants to say it out loud too, that's great. Looking for footprints after a fresh snowfall. What a great thing to do. Yeah.
Can I share mine out loud?
Oh yeah, go for it, Sonia.
No, just at one school I was at the outdoor school, like we left the sunflower stalks up a long time, and then those like dehydrated heads of sunflowers actually then got turned into like bird feeders. Like you like did the whole like peanut butter or like nut butter thing with seeds. Like they kind of became like a holding place for birds to be, like from when there were the seeds, and then the location was still the same. So I think that like familiar space was helpful for the young kiddos too, to see continuation.
Yeah, definitely. I love those threads that kind of carry through like that. Candace has posted pumpkin planters and corn roasts. Yeah, those are wonderful. Garlic planting, absolutely. Well, we can keep that going too and keep it open if folks are like thinking of things as we go along. It's always great. Again, we also have our discussion group coming up again on October 19th. So that's always a great time to come and share ideas with colleagues and other folks who are working in this world together too, or have that interest. I love hearing like the ideas from other teachers, other community workers, people who are working on this together. It's great hearing examples from you guys. Oh yeah, Andy Goldsworthy art creations with nature bits. Those are always, I love Andy Goldsworthy. Yeah, big heart to that. And yeah, Karen, some schools are doing cooking with harvest. Absolutely. And we're going to share some resources today connected to like cooking and food skills. I think fall and winter is a great time to engage with those food skills too. So we'll get into more of that. Kind of connected. Oh, I want to share what Dawn's saying too. We've saved some heads of sunflowers that have a few seeds, and kids can remove seeds and then later do microgreens. That's a really nice cycle to share with. Absolutely. And Alana's saying that my kids will be making spits with our harvested sunflower seeds from, oh yeah, I want to try some of those. It's always nice when kids get to eat something at the end. They're like, that's a big motivation to get engaged. Oh yeah, winter kale for kale chips and kale pesto. Yeah, absolutely. These are great ideas, you guys. Thank you. I was mentioning the spec nature school resource earlier connected to the fall leaves. They also have a really great set of resources if you are thinking about sort of the soil and that underground area connected to, yeah, soil, forest soil, what lives in the soil. And I have worked with these. I teach grade 4-5 in Vancouver. And so the rock cycle is a part of the science curriculum. And I really think that these sets of resources are really valuable to think about growing food with, and also to really make the rock cycle like feel tangible. Sometimes when we talk about rocks and geology and geological time, I love thinking about it in like that expansive, abstract way. But to make it very concrete and to be able to touch like some matter and material and understand that it has relationship to food that you are eating, that is really powerful, I think. And so another one of the things that they have up there, I think, Tessa, will you go to the next slide? I think it's yeah, this soil sampling test is a really easy one to work with students. And we started with our garden bed soil, so using that as something to test. And you basically just take some of that soil out, you mix it with water, you kind of mix it all together in the jar, and then eventually it's settles out with the clay at the top, the silt underneath, and the sand. And so what we also did was we did comparisons with different types of soil around the school ground. So it's just a way of kind of looking at that and thinking about like, what are the repercussions for the food you're growing, learning about sort of what those soil contents are, and kind of engaging in that kind of science exploration or inquiry. And it doesn't have to be limited to grade 4-5, but if you are teaching in those upper intermediate, rock cycle is engaged with in that kind of way too. So and I think one of the things that makes Specs resource so great is that they have tons of these easy printouts. So if you're like looking for something where you're like, I don't need to make charts, I don't need to do all of those things, they have it ready made. And so the materials, it's pretty clear about what you need to collect to pull together. So I highly recommend that resource. I think can go to Oh yeah, teach food first. Yeah. So this is coming back to thinking about working with food in schools. So um, I'm noticing, especially kind of coming back in these like in the shifts that has happened throughout COVID, but food is like much more part of the school year again. And Teach Food First is a resource that I really also recommend. They have a really great framework to be thinking about how to work with students with food, and thinking about ways of introducing new foods to students and language around that. So it's resources that were created with like dietitians and other educators and folks working in public health thinking about language around food and ways of kind of updated ways of thinking about working with food in a school setting. They also have some really great resources. These are some that have been looking at this fall, but the traditional First Nations food lesson set, they have 3 lessons that are part of that set, and with really great videos and ways of talking about food kind of in not just in concrete like knife skills ways, but really thinking about food from a bunch of different directions. So I also would suggest taking a look on there. There's a video that I looked through on there that I really loved with a student talking about his experience in harvesting traditional foods and sharing language around traditional foods as well. So I recommend taking a look at that. And then also Hands-on Food is another resource that is connected through us through Farm to School BC. It was created with educators and dietitians again. And there are lots of lesson plans on there, particularly if you're thinking about winter months with cooking and preserving. And also some great links to partner resources where you're thinking about different kinds of skill sets that you might be able to build up with students in those winter months. If you're anticipating harvest or even if you're not, but thinking about how to approach those things and building up school, like those skill sets over the course of the whole year, not just having to like do them immediately, like when you have food coming up, but maybe kind of building those skills in advance. And I think I'm going to pass it over to Tessa. I'm realizing that it's always hard to know if you're speaking fast or speaking slow, but I'll pass it over to you now.
Perfect. Thanks, Kaylin. Nice to have a little bit more time than we had anticipated. Speaking of having more time, I feel like this time of year with the school garden, we're starting to have a little more space in our minds for some bigger projects that we might want to think of for the year ahead. The springtime and then the September, October can just be like go, go, go in the school garden, just keeping up with planting and harvesting and weeding and watering. And then as we come into November and the winter time, it can be great to take a step back and look at a bit bigger picture with our school garden and think of perhaps some projects that we want to take on. In that space, I know right now for me, thinking about projects for school gardens, I'm really present in the drought conditions that we're experiencing in the summer. I'm thinking about what are some solutions that we can use at a school garden level of building more resilience into our school gardens. Even without the drought conditions, summer watering in school gardens can be such a challenge, whether it be that school districts shut off the water, or you don't have enough volunteers to help do the water, or you have a bust in your irrigation and everyone's away on their summer holiday and no one can fix it. Watering in the summer is a real challenge. And so Kaylin and I wanted to share some examples from schools across the province or some ideas from across the province of ways to build a bit more resilience into your garden, especially in light of drought conditions. So the first example I wanted to share comes from Wickenish Community School in Tofino. This school garden is so fortunate to have a community partner, Tofino Community Food Initiative, working on a weekly capacity with the school. And in such, they've created this incredible food forest. But they have really challenging summer drought conditions this year in Tofino. All outdoor water use was banned. So even watering food gardens outside was not allowed in Tofino. So it meant this school garden had to go through 2 months of no water, which is challenging even knowing that this garden had a lot of perennials and a lot of resilience already. They still lost some different species and just had their garden wasn't flourishing like they had expected it would. So as a solution to this, they decided to install some rainwater catchment systems. And so the picture here is just kind of their first step of the project. They've installed these 2 barrels with the support of a volunteer, but this is intended to be the seed of a much larger project. So they're wanting to really look at how can we use water catchment in school gardens to provide resilience in the summer drought conditions. A solution that I love about this, it's not just about providing water, but it's about putting that control back into the volunteers that are our teachers that are running the school garden. Because so often the challenges with watering is around facilities departments not being present in the summer to help have water on in gardens. And so I think this system could build resiliency into the school garden on multiple levels. And I would love to hear folks know of any school garden that has a large rainwater catchment system. Please share that out over our listserv because it'd be great to build some examples across the province of school gardens doing this. Another neat water-wise program that's happening right now in School District 68 in Nanaimo is there's a group of VIU students that got together as a project. They're education students. They're in their final year of teachers college, and they decided to do a community-based project where they repurposed old garden hoses and developed drip irrigation systems for school gardens. And their project created enough momentum that then a local irrigation supply donated a bunch of drip irrigation to the project. And so it's wonderful to see when the community engages the kind of momentum that can build around those projects. So they were able to provide drip irrigation for 4 different school gardens. And again, that's again a seed of a project. These things kind of build up from there, and they're excited for what else they can maybe do with that. And now 4 gardens have a low flow drip irrigation system installed in them. One other climate resilient solution I see in school gardens is more and more people are reaching out to me saying, I want to move over to more perennial or food forest focus in our school gardens. So people are recognizing that that annual food production requires more consistent watering as well as more maintenance and a lot of other things. And so I feel like food forestry is just starting to become more popular in school gardens. And it's a really exciting concept. It comes from a permaculture concept of using vertical space. So having a fruit tree, and then underneath that fruit tree have some companion shrubs, and under that some lower herbaceous layer, and under that perhaps some funguses or things that are help incorporating those plants into the soil too. And in permaculture, they call that a guild, all the plants that are associated with a companion fruit tree. So not only is that creating more resilience to climate, that once those perennials are established, they can be more tolerant to drought conditions. It's also wonderful learning opportunities for students to look at how are plants working together? How are they using different spaces and different nutrients? How are they offering in reciprocity to each other different things that the plants need? So it's a lot about companion planting too. So more and more we're seeing food forests come up as an idea in school gardens. And again, if you have any examples to share, we'd love to hear from you. So post that onto our listserv if you're working with a school garden that has a food forest. We'd love to hear more about it. A great example of a food forest is in Nanaimo. Dover Bay Secondary School has a thriving food forest that's completely student run, and a high school eco club runs a food forest. They grow seeds too. They have a seed production area, and they're selling those seeds to have a fundraiser back to the school garden. So if you're looking for a neat example, you can check out Dover Bay Secondary School Food Forest. And I'm going to pass it back to Kaylin for a few more examples.
I love those examples, Tessa. They're really great to hear about, like the ways those things kind of just emerge like out of the need, and then and community coming together in that way. It was really great. I last year took a farm school program through KPU, through Richmond Farm School, and one of the participants from the previous year is a ceramicist, and she built these beautiful oyas to help with the irrigation in the on the farm. And they're a very old technology, but I think like they come in many different shapes and forms. But and I think like they've definitely been used all over the world, but originating, I think, in North Africa and in China, and they're like thousands of years old in terms of the technology. But the basic principle is that there is like a clay vessel that is submerged under the soil level. So you can see that in the pictures here. And then there's an opening that you have access to with some kind of covering or lid. You're able to pour water into it. And then through sort of the way the tension works within the vessel, the water it only seeps out as the soil becomes dry, which is really incredible. and I think it says in this percentage, I've read several different numbers, but I think up to like 70% water saving through this method. And that's just because you're getting the water really deep into the ground that you really can't even get through like that kind of surface water in the same way, because there's just that inefficiency of evaporation that happens at the top of the surface of the water. So they're really incredible. That's a really cool project to try to do. And I think what I've read is that once you plant them, there's like, I think you can get like about up to 1.5 feet away from whatever it is you're trying to water. And the roots will just kind of like seek that water source out and grow out around them. Yeah, so great for supporting deep root growth, great for water conservation. And I think there are some really great lessons online as well, where you could just make your own. If you're not a ceramicist, you don't have access to that. I think you can buy them, but also just like putting two terracotta pots together, having a plug at the bottom and something on the top, it will operate in a similar fashion. Tessa, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so yeah, right, that part I forgot to as well, just thinking about how they're firing and thinking about that technology. But these are just giving you a sense of how the roots will like form around that. And I think a great way to, depending on what kind of resources you have at your school, I think a great way to like engage in ADST in design and thinking about design solutions that are connected to climate resilience. Like how are you, I think some of those that you talked about too, Tessa, earlier touch on that as well, which is like, okay, what is a real need that we have in our community and in our school ground, in our garden, and how are we designing solutions or drawing on older technologies and employing them to be able to serve that need. So yeah, I think yeah, it's fun to kind of do it. Like Tessa said, if you know of any other kinds of technologies or solutions for that kind of thing and thinking about climate resilience, you could share them in the chat or share them through our listserv or bring them to the discussion group on the 19th. It would be great to hear about them. And we're going to move into our season reflection, which is, it is a reflective time of year, so like easing into the rainy months and or into the darker months. But this time of year, if you have formed a garden committee or you have some kind of community built around the work that you're doing, it's a great time for the committee to kind of come together and to think a little bit about how the season went, and what went well, what do we need to change for the coming year. And I think also a great time, like some of the things we've shared with you here, is to kind of plan for the upcoming year, thinking about like, do we want to try something new for this coming year? And we have a great worksheet that I will have to take a closer look, but there is a worksheet on our website for this. If you need help kind of like guiding that within your committee, I know my committee is about to meet next week and there's lots of things for us to talk about. So if you are looking for that, we can send that out in an email kind of going forward, or maybe bring it to the discussion group on the 19th. Grace has just added here, oh yeah, adding 2 terracotta pots and siliconing them together. Yeah, that's right. It's like using that kind of silicone as an adhere to adhere the 2 pots together for the oyas and with a cork in the bottom. That's great. Another thing in terms of season reflection is that we will be reflecting a little bit going forward on the School Garden Mentorship series. This is Tessa, for Tessa and myself, this is our first year running the series, and we will be kind of building a survey, thinking about what we're going to go forward into the coming year doing. And we would really love to, we're hoping to pull together a survey in the next month or so that we will send out in our listserv or through our School Garden Mentorship email list. So if you're not already on that, I would encourage you to hop onto the website and join up for that. If there are topics or things that you're interested, that's kind of what we're hoping with that survey that we will form together. And then that way we can really think about how we can serve you guys better through this series. So yeah, can keep an eye out for that. Tessa, is this one's for me too, isn't it? Yeah. It's a great time also in that season reflection to think through how to prepare for spring. So these are kind of ideas that I'm sure some of you have already got in your routines already, but thinking about taking inventory of equipment, going through equipment maintenance, finding folks to be able to help you with that through your pack or through within your committee and with teachers. Kind of cleaning and oiling tools, packing those things away for the next season, thinking through how to organize volunteers for the coming year. So it feels like July and August are far way away, but they creep up very quickly. And I think thinking up plans for summer volunteers is really a great thing to do in the winter, or start kind of training people into that process. Building student and community skills. So like we were talking before, thinking about food processing skills that could be built up, or even just the routines that go along with the garden. Thinking about spring fundraisers and also applying for grants. So this is something we're going to kind of move into. And I will pass it over to Tessa so she can talk about our grants.
Great. Thanks, Kaylin. Today, our annual Farm to School BC grants are open. So it's an exciting day for us that every year we have our fall Farm to School BC grants. So you will find all the information on our website. It's also sent out over our listservs. But this year, like in the past years, we'll be offering grants of $1,000 and $3,000 for any kind of food literacy related project at your school. It's not limited to school gardens. And we're really hoping to reach broadly across diverse projects across the province, and with a focus on serving rural, remote, and First Nation schools as well. I'm hoping that our grants are equitable and accessible for a wide range of programs across BC. If you'd like more information on the grants, you can reach out to your regional community animator, and you can also attend our Farm to School BC grants information session, which will be on Wednesday, October 25th, and it's from 3:30 to 4:30. Sorry, there's a small typo on this slide, but that's a great opportunity to come together with our grants coordinator and learn more about the grants and have an opportunity to ask questions as well. One of the wonderful things about the Farm to School BC grants is it's not just the funding that you receive, you also receive the direct connection to community animator if you fall within one of those regional hubs, and we're happy to come visit your school and learn more about your project and help support you with implementing the project as well. I always get really excited when the grants fall within the Central Island Hub to get to have special focus on those projects for my year ahead. The Farm to School BC grants are just one grant that's out there to support school gardens, but there's many other grants also out there. One that's coming up right now is the Go Wild grant through the World Wildlife Fund of Canada. And it's a great grant for $1,500 that is due at the end of this month. So if you are writing grants, keep that deadline on your horizon because it's coming up quick. There are other grants too that are throughout the year. The Go grant, the third one on that list there, is great if you're wanting to do field trips. So if you're curious to go visit a farm or another community event in your area, that grant is specifically for funding for field trips. And then the TD Friends of Environment Fund is a great one if you're looking to fund environmental education at your school. Grant writing can feel intimidating if you haven't done it before. Your community animating region's there to help support you. Often people reach out to me saying that they'd like to apply for a grant for their school, and a community animator can help walk you through that process, review your applications, and support you along with that as well. So use us as a resource, and also just don't be intimidated by it. Once you get going, they actually, if you can just clearly, succinctly express your idea, that's what they're looking for. And so just to dive into it. The neat thing I find about writing grants is not just the hopefulness of providing funds for a project, but it's also that sitting down with your committee and visioning, what do you want your garden to look like? If we had funds, what projects could you bring on board? And I think that can be a really generative process of dreaming up your next stages for your garden. So not just the funds, but the whole process around that can be helpful for moving your garden in a direction that the school is desiring. Lastly, we just want to remind you that we have our discussion group. This one, instead of being next Thursday, is the Thursday after October 19th. And those are a great chance to come together with other educators, facilitators, community members, and dive into these topics. So for this next one, we'll be bouncing off of the theme that we talked about today with Winterizing the school garden, but our discussion groups are a chance for us to chat with each other, learn more from each other. People often share activities that they're up to, and we can problem solve or discuss things that arise as a group. So it's a really nice place to dive deeper into these topics in a more conversational approach. And sorry for the formatting. We've just moved over to a new slide template and there's some things we're sorting out in there. So we've lost the contact information. But if you do go over to our website, you'll have the information to connect with Kaylin and I, but please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. And I will just I'm going to stop share so we can see our faces here and just open up because we have a few more minutes left. I'd love to hear if anyone is out there winterizing their school garden, mulching their garden beds, planting garlic. How are you engaging in this month in your school garden? We have such a tiny group today, so it's nice to get the chance to chat a little bit at the end here. And maybe Kaylin will just hit stop recording so no one feels
yeah,
like
that sounds great. I'll stop recording. There we go.